So, more time for the same crime? Got more Rhetoric coming right up. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Common Sense Logic Reason. And as always, I want to say thank y'all for joining me today. So I have more Rhetoric for y'all. Got a classic. More time for the same crime is an example of end result thinking. Again, a bunch of disparities that are unfavorable to black folks, that black folks cry about all the time. Anyway, on average, the average black person, when standing before a judge, typically is sentenced to more time than the average white person for the exact same crime. Now, black folks looked at this and say, hey, that's racism. That's racism of the justice system being against black people. But in reality, it's not. In reality, there are very legitimate reasons why black folks, on average, receive more time for the same crime than the average white person. There are several, but I'm going to cover three. Now, the number one reason why black people receive more time for the same crime is because black folks commit crime en masse. I mean, black people commit crime at a rate that's far excessive than any other group in America. So the average black person, when standing before a judge, tends to have a longer criminal arrest record than the average white person that stands before a judge. Now, this is something that's taken into consideration when sentencing is handed down. So if this is taken into consideration, if a black person has a longer criminal arrest record, then obviously they're going to deal with that person much more harsher than that white person or anyone who has a less criminal arrest record. I mean, if you got, let's say two black people standing before a judge, they both were arrested for selling, say, marijuana on the street. One black person doesn't have any criminal past. The other black person has a record as long as him. And that person has also been arrested for possession of marijuana before. Well, who do you think they're going to be more harsher on? Obviously, they're going to be more harsher on a person that basically has a long criminal arrest record because they've been there before, and obviously they aren't learning. The black person who's never been in trouble with the law before, well, that person will probably get probation. In the whole probation process, the person who's been repeatedly in trouble with the law has probably already been in that probation process. So if you have a longer criminal arrest record, obviously it's going to be taken into consideration when sentencing is handed down. And then another reason that you have is you basically have a lot of crime clustered in urban areas, and these typically be areas where people are often poor and impoverished, again, because of their own behavior, and don't have the money to afford a lawyer, so then they have to depend upon public defenders. Now, typically you have situations in which black people are clustered in these small areas, in these certain areas, and they're committing high rates of crime, which means that you have a high rate of black people standing before a judge and a high rate of people who can't afford lawyers, would mean that they're dependent upon public defenders. Well, because the public defenders have so many cases, so many backlogs of cases, they can't possibly defend a person to the fullest. So in this situation, what these public defenders often do is just push for plea deals to try to get clearance in these cases so they can move on to the next case. They can get through these backlogs of cases. They just don't have the time or the resources to defend one to the full extent of the law, or as full as they possibly can. As opposed to, let's say, some white kid in some rural area where there's very little crime, and the public defenders don't have a backlog of cases. So a public defenders in that area can basically represent a person much better in that situation and settings than they could than a public defender can in a typical urban area where there's so many cases. There's so many backlogs of cases. And I personally saw this before. Now the prosecutors know this in these certain areas, these certain settings. They know this. So what they oftentimes do they'll push for more time to pad their stats. So when they try to become a judge later on in their career, they have a stats in their career say, I did this and I did that. So they push for more time because they know they can get away with it, as opposed to an area where public defenders can defend a person more fully, or that person hire a private lawyer. They know if that person hires a private lawyer, they can't get away with it because a private lawyer will defend that person to the fullest extent of the law. Now, another reason why, the third reason why that I'm going to cover is basically tactics to stymie crime. Like mandatory minimums and police stop and frisk and stuff like that. Well, oftentimes in these areas where you have high crime rates, what people often make cry is the people who live in that area will oftentimes cry about the crime rate and cause politicians to take measures. And heavy policing tactics is one of those measures, often measures that are employed to help stymie crime, such as, for instance, as they say, mandatory minimum. So if you got people committing crime in the area and you got mandatory minimum laws, a person who didn't have a criminal record, it basically go out there and commit a crime. Well, since they have mandatory minimums, that means that they're trying to be harsher on crime, and they're gonna hand down harsher sentencing, as opposed to an area where you have very little crime. Well, oftentimes you have high crime rates in these urban areas where black folks are living, causing police departments and the law and the government to have to take more extreme measures to attack the crime. Oftentimes going to lead to harsher sentencing for the people who are in that area committing the crime. But it's all the harsher sentencing and the steps that they take, the measures that they take to try to stymie the crime, is all because of the high crime rates in the first place, which again could be solved by stop committing crime. So these are the reasons. Again, there are other reasons, but these are the main reasons why blacks receive more time for the same crime. Although it is true that the average black person was standing for a judge will receive more time for the same crime. But as I just explained and broke down, it's because of legitimate reasons, not because of racism and white supremacy. And once again, black people can solve all of this by not committing crime at all. You do not have to commit any crime, to be honest with you. Anyway, so if you ever hear any of these race hustlers or these black victims saying that black folks get more time for the same crime, well, now you know, and knowing is half the battle. And it's always y'all, until next time.